The Paleolithic economy, the deep roots of exchange and gift-giving. Welcome, and let's embark on a journey back in time, not to a world of mere survival, but to the very origins of our economic nature. When we picture the Paleolithic era, spanning from the first use of stone tools around 3.3 million years ago to the end of the last ice age around 11,700 years ago, we often imagine a brutish and short existence dominated solely by the daily struggle for food and shelter. This image, however, obscures a far more complex and fascinating reality. The economy of the Paleolithic was not about money, markets, or capital accumulation. It was a sophisticated social system built upon the fundamental pillars of reciprocity, gift-giving, and the strategic exchange of resources within and between small, highly mobile bands of hunter-gatherers. To understand this economy is to understand the social glue that held early human societies together and provided the foundational principles upon which all subsequent economic systems would be built. It was an economy embedded not in institutions, but in social relationships and cultural norms. The key to unlocking this ancient world lies in moving beyond modern concepts of transaction and delving into the deep-seated human impulses for cooperation, sharing, and building social alliances that ensured long-term resilience and success. The most fundamental economic unit was the small band, typically consisting of 20 to 50 individuals, often connected by kinship. Within this intimate group, the primary economic mechanism was what anthropologists call generalized reciprocity. This is a fancy term for what we might simply call sharing, without an immediate expectation of return. Imagine a successful hunt where a large animal, like a mammoth or a bison, is brought down. The sheer size of the carcass made it impossible for a single hunter or his immediate family to consume it before it spoiled. But beyond this practical necessity, the act of distributing the meat throughout the band was a powerful economic and social strategy. It was not a simple division of food. It was a ritualized act of strengthening social bonds. The successful hunter gained prestige and social capital, not by hoarding but by giving. This system of sharing acted as a primitive but highly effective form of social insurance. On any given day, a hunter might return empty-handed, but the collective success of the group, stored as social obligation and reciprocity, ensured that he and his family would still eat. This safety net was crucial for survival in an unpredictable environment where resources were scattered and hunting success was never guaranteed. The food was shared, tools were commonly used, and knowledge was freely transferred, all reinforcing the collective identity of the band against the harsh realities of the natural world. This internal economy of sharing was complemented by a division of labor that, while often influenced by biological factors, was likely more fluid than once believed. The classic model posits men as hunters of large game and women as gatherers of plant food, small animals, and insects. However, this division was not rigidly exclusionary. Evidence and studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies suggest that women sometimes participated in hunts, and men certainly gathered. More importantly, from an economic standpoint, the gathering activities undertaken primarily by women provided the majority of the band's caloric intake, often 60 to 80%, and was a consistent, reliable source of nutrition. Hunting, while riskier and less predictable, provided essential proteins, fats, and prestigious materials like hides, bones, and tusks. This symbiotic relationship between hunting and gathering was the bedrock of Paleolithic subsistence. It was a diversified portfolio strategy that minimized risk. If the hunt failed, the gathered plants, nuts, and fruits ensured survival. This efficient allocation of human resources based on skill and circumstance, rather than on a centralized command, represents one of humanity's first and most successful economic specializations, maximizing the overall caloric and nutritional yield for the entire group and allowing for the demographic expansion of early human populations. While the internal life of the band was governed by sharing and direct cooperation, the interactions between different bands introduced a more complex layer of economic behavior: exchange. These bands were not isolated islands, they were nodes in a vast continent-spanning social network. The movement of people, ideas, and, crucially, materials across astonishing distances is etched into the archaeological record. The most compelling evidence for this comes from the distribution of raw materials that are geographically distinct. Seashells from the Mediterranean have been found in caves in Central Europe, hundreds of kilometers inland. High-quality flint from quarries in modern-day France and Poland was traded across regions, ending up in settlements far from its source. Obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for its sharpness and beauty, was transported over distances of up to 1,000 kilometers from its volcanic origins. This was not trade in the modern sense of a market-driven price system. This was down-the-line trade, a slow, incremental process of exchange where goods would pass from band to band through a series of localized interactions. A band living near an obsidian source might trade some of it with a neighboring band for decorative shells or furs. That neighboring band would then trade some of that obsidian, now mixed with their own goods, to the next band further away, and so on. The value of these items was not merely utilitarian. The movement of these exotic materials served multiple economic and social purposes. On a practical level, it provided access to superior resources. An obsidian blade is sharper and more precise than one made from local chert or quartzite, increasing the efficiency of butchery and toolmaking. But the significance went far deeper. Possessing a non-local exotic material was a source of immense social prestige. It signaled that an individual or a band had extensive social connections and alliances stretching far into the distance. These alliances were the ultimate insurance policy. In times of local famine, drought, or other ecological disasters, a band with strong ties to other groups could migrate into their territory and call upon the obligation of reciprocity for survival. Thus, the exchange of valued objects was, first and foremost, the physical manifestation of building and maintaining these life-saving social networks. The object itself was a token, a symbol of a relationship. The economic transaction was inseparable from the social and diplomatic one. This system required a deep understanding of trust, obligation, and the long-term value of relationships, concepts that remain at the heart of business and diplomacy to this day. It was an economy of connection, where the flow of goods mapped the flow of social trust across the Paleolithic landscape. Alongside this indirect exchange, there were also likely more direct forms of interband interaction, particularly during seasonal aggregations. At certain times of the year, when resources were abundant, such as at a salmon run or a migratory herd crossing, multiple bands would congregate in large numbers. These gatherings were pivotal economic and social events. They were occasions for arranging marriages, which was itself a profound form of economic and genetic exchange, preventing inbreeding and creating permanent kinship alliances between groups. They were times for sharing knowledge, technologies, and cultural practices like rituals and art, and they were undoubtedly times for direct barter and gift-giving. The famous cave paintings of Lascaux and Chauvet, located deep within complex cave systems, might not have been everyday art galleries but rather served as central locations for such important communal and possibly intergroup rituals. Within these temporary hubs, the act of gift-giving would have been a primary economic driver. A prestigious gift, such as a fine obsidian core, a string of exotic shells, or a rare ochre pigment, created a powerful obligation. This was not a free gift, it demanded a reciprocal gift of equivalent social value at a future date. This created bonds of debt and obligation that tied groups together over years and generations, ensuring future cooperation and mutual aid. This ceremonial exchange was the precursor to more formalized trade, establishing the protocols and the very idea of comparative value that would later become central to human economies. To truly grasp the logic of the Paleolithic economy, we must delve into the anthropological concept of the gift economy, most famously articulated by Marcel Mauss in his seminal work, The Gift. Mauss argued that in so-called archaic societies, gifts are never free. They are imbued with a spiritual force, the how of the Maori, as he described it, a part of the giver's soul that travels with the object. The recipient is thus obligated not only to reciprocate, but to do so with interest, to give back more than they received in order to finally lay that spiritual force to rest and avoid misfortune. While we cannot project Maori concepts directly onto Paleolithic minds, the underlying principle is profoundly insightful. In the Paleolithic context, a gift was a social contract. To give was to demonstrate generosity, power, and prestige. To receive without reciprocating was to become subordinate, to accept a position of social debt and inferiority. This created a constant dynamic flow of goods, services, and obligations that bound society together. The goal was not to accumulate material wealth as an end in itself, but to convert material surplus into social capital. The wealthiest individual was not the one who had the most, but the one who had given the most away, thereby placing the most people in their debt. This system stood in stark contrast to the later logic of the market economy. There was no concept of profit in the modern sense. The value of an object was not abstract but was deeply embedded in its social history and the identity of its giver. An obsidian blade was valuable not just for its cutting edge, but because it came from a specific mountain, was worked by a renowned toolmaker, and was given by a powerful ally from a distant band. Its value was a composite of its utility, its rarity, its symbolism, and its social biography. This embedded economy meant that economic behavior could not be separated from social, religious, and kinship structures. The act of exchange was often ritualized, accompanied by feasts, ceremonies, and marriages. This is a world away from the impersonal transaction of a modern stock market. The Paleolithic economy was a moral economy, governed by rules of fairness, reciprocity, and the long-term maintenance of social harmony. Hoarding resources was not just antisocial, it was a threat to the very survival of the group, and was likely met with severe social sanctions, from ridicule to ostracism or even violence. The incentive structure was clear: cooperate, share, and build alliances, or face isolation and almost certain death. The cognitive and technological foundations of this early economy are just as important as its social structures. The development of sophisticated stone tool technologies, like the Levallois technique or the blade cores of the Upper Paleolithic, required forward planning, mental abstraction, and a deep understanding of geometry and material properties. This was not a random bashing of rocks. It was a skilled craft that involved visualizing the final tool within a raw core of stone and executing a precise series of strikes to produce a standardized, efficient implement. This cognitive capacity for planning and complex sequence execution was the same mental hardware required for economic behavior, calculating the future value of a gift, planning a seasonal migration to exploit different resources, or remembering complex social debts and obligations. Furthermore, the emergence of symbolic thought, evidenced by the stunning cave art, personal adornments like beads and pendants, and ritualistic burials, points to a mind capable of abstract representation. This ability to assign symbolic value to objects is the absolute prerequisite for any form of economic exchange beyond the most immediate barter. A shell is not just a shell, it is a symbol of status, a connection to the sea, a unit of social currency. The Paleolithic mind was not an economic man, but it was a social mind whose capacities for symbolism, future planning, and rule-following created the perfect psychological substrate for the first intricate economies of gift and exchange. The legacy of the Paleolithic economy is not a relic confined to the distant past. Its echoes are deeply embedded in the very fabric of our modern economic and social lives. While we operate within a globalized, monetized market system, the ancient drivers of reciprocity and social bonding continue to exert a powerful influence. Consider the modern workplace. We engage in reciprocity when we help a colleague with a project, expecting they will return the favor in the future, building social capital within the organization. This is a direct descendant of the hunter sharing meat to build prestige and obligation. The entire concept of networking in business is predicated on the idea of building alliances through the exchange of favors, information, and introductions, a modern, professionalized form of the gift economy. Even in the realm of consumer culture, the act of gift-giving during holidays remains a powerful social ritual, creating and reinforcing bonds of family and friendship, where the value of the gift is often measured by its social meaning rather than its price tag. Moreover, the fundamental human aversion to pure impersonal transaction can still be seen. We are often uncomfortable with discussing money directly in social situations, preferring to frame help as a favor. The recent rise of the sharing economy, with platforms for renting out homes or carpooling, taps into this deep-seated psychology of trust and peer-to-peer reciprocity, albeit mediated by digital reputation systems that act as a proxy for ancient social standing. The immense popularity of social media can also be viewed through this lens. We give content, likes, and shares, building a form of digital social capital and reinforcing our tribal affiliations in a vast digital landscape. The Paleolithic instinct to belong to a group, to contribute to it, and to be recognized for that contribution is a driving force behind many of our online behaviors. In this light, the algorithms that govern our feeds are not just lines of code, they are the new landscape across which our ancient social and economic instincts play out. In conclusion, the economy of the Paleolithic era was far from simple. It was a sophisticated, adaptive system that used the mechanisms of generalized reciprocity within bands and balanced reciprocity or gift exchange between bands to manage risk, build resilience, and foster social complexity. It was an economy where value was social and symbolic, where giving was a form of power, and where long-term alliances were the most valuable asset of all. The cognitive revolution that enabled symbolic thought and complex planning provided the mental toolkit for these intricate social and economic negotiations. By studying this deep history, we gain a profound perspective on our own economic behaviors. The impersonal forces of the market and the logic of profit are relatively recent layers over a much older and more deeply ingrained human propensity to create economies based on connection, obligation, and trust. The story of economics does not begin with money or markets. It begins with a shared meal around a fire, an obsidian blade passed from hand to hand across a continent, and the unspoken promise that a gift given today will be remembered and repaid tomorrow. It is the story of how humanity learned to cooperate on a grand scale, and in doing so, laid the groundwork for everything that was to come. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the origins of our economic world. If you found this exploration of the Paleolithic gift economy fascinating, please support this channel by liking this video and subscribing for more content. Your engagement helps immensely in building this community of curious minds. In our next lecture, we will witness one of the most profound transformations in human history, the Neolithic Revolution, the birth of production. We will explore how humanity's shift from hunting and gathering to farming fundamentally altered our relationship with the environment, material wealth, and each other, setting the stage for the first villages, inequalities, and the very concept of an economic surplus. Don't miss it!